This video was made possible by CuriosityStream. On February 24, 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a special military operation in eastern Ukraine. A declaration followed only minutes later with bombings in Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Odessa. Russian missiles specifically targeted Ukrainian infrastructure, including their largest international airport, and quickly spread to include the bombing of housing, bridges, schools, and hospitals. Buildings were targets of attack, strategically aimed to cripple the Ukrainian government while killing and displacing its citizens. But buildings also provided images of hope for Ukrainians, when some of its most celebrated and unique architectural designs provided images of cultural triumph and pride. On March 18, 2022, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky released a video to Facebook and Instagram. This video came at a crucial time to deliver information about his government's initiatives to provide humanitarian aid while the country was being invaded by Russian forces. The words and information communicated in the video were important, but the location of its filming were an additional and critical component of delivering its intended message. Behind Zelensky was a curious building called the House with Chimeras, or the Horodetsky House, located in the heart of Kyiv, the capital city of Ukraine. The building was built in 1902 and designed by the architect Vladislav Horodetsky as an apartment building, which included a grand apartment for the architect himself on the top floor. Horodetsky was a pretty remarkable architect and a very colorful character, celebrated as Ukraine's version of Antonio Gaudí. This is likely due to their shared reverie for playful forms, their common embrace of ornament, and a personalized flair that came to be associated with a particular place and a culture. They might also be compared for their shared love for including animalistic elements and forms into their buildings. This house, as a clientless celebration of the architect's own architectural ideas, embodies some truly remarkable creative impulses. It is a mash of styles, and it's caked in ornament, to the point where sculpture and building meld inseparably into one another. The exterior is covered in cement, masking distinctions between the elements by rendering them in a single material. Column becomes wall, becomes a forest of animals. It's here you can see the evidence of Horodetsky's love of animals. It's almost like the building has a wild hairdo of frogs and elephants, deer and fish. It is in front of this house that Zelensky declared, "I am here." This declaration came amidst reports that Zelensky had fled his country to secure his personal safety. But that wasn't true, and instead the president crafted this unifyingly defiant message, partly through words, and partly through visual association with an important cultural architectural symbol. The filming site stands directly across from the House of the President, a stark, Soviet-style neoclassical building designed to communicate the power, stability, and permanence of governance. But if I didn't tell you that those buildings were in Kyiv, you probably wouldn't know it. It almost looks like any other governmental building from around the world. The Horodetsky House, on the other hand, doesn't follow those established rules of order. It creates its own rules. But it does so in a way that could only be done in Kyiv, and by a celebrated architect embraced by his home city as its shining architectural visionary. The building survived Soviet control of the city and now serves as an important location for Ukrainian diplomatic gatherings. The building is an important cultural symbol. It evokes pride and establishes the physical qualities of a place. It's unique, and its survival has defied all odds. It's the result of passion and pride, and not enforced obedience or control. During times of war and violent conflict, architecture can become an important touchstone for all sides of a conflict. In the case of the Zelensky video, architecture served as a point of pride and collective identity. For aggressors, architecture can be a significant target for destruction. Attacking cultural symbols deals damage in a way that cuts deeply into the morale of those affected. This loss isn't to be equated with the loss of human life, which is the most urgent crisis in times like these. But the destruction of the built environment has far-reaching consequences on a number of levels. Many might be able to relate to this when recalling their experiences and feelings around the attack of the World Trade Center. The targeting and destruction of these structures killed 3,000 people directly. Also, thousands of people were killed or devastated by coming into close contact with the events. And the tragedy cut into the entire country, who relied on the World Trade Center buildings to stand for something meaningful inside of their lives. That may have happened only subconsciously, but when taken away, it reveals an indelible mark on your sense of place. Originally, the building's architect, Minoru Yamasaki, thought of the Twin Towers as symbols of peace. His vision for the towers were to become a living representation of man's belief in humanity, his need for individual dignity, his beliefs in the cooperation of men, and through this cooperation, his ability to find greatness. Their monumentality and lack of overt symbolism meant they could become important to others in their own way. Senator Bob Graham called them a signature of America's economic strength and political power. Now those buildings have taken on a completely different connotation from the architect's intention. Rather than peace, they represent violence. Instead of economic strength and political power, their destruction shows us just how vulnerable we are. This is one of the reasons that architecture becomes a significant target and weapon during war. As targets, buildings are important constructions that establish the qualities of a place and its identity. They are purveyors of cultural memory that register the passages of time. Wiping away these buildings erases important aspects of a culture's identity. During World War II, the Nazis specifically targeted museums for bombing for this very reason. Museums like the Altus Museum, the News Museum, the Pergamon Museum, the Bode Museum, and the National Gallery were all targets to cut away at physical and psychological cultural anchors. Logistically, buildings house and protect key political and economic infrastructure and institutions. Targeting buildings like hospitals for destruction disrupts the ability to care for the injured or the sick. Train stations facilitate the movement of people, like those trying to flee an area, and attacking housing targets an individual's ability to live and care for themselves. Additionally, architecture can be used as a significant weapon in warfare. Buildings become important defensible points of occupation and takeover. Temporary structures are key for housing moving troops, and after the conflict is over, new buildings are built to assert control in the newly occupied area. Hitler himself said that if Germany hadn't lost World War I, that he would have become a great architect, something like Michelangelo instead of a politician. His interest in architecture wasn't just an appreciation of the great works. He truly understood the role that it plays in shaping cultural identity, and he did ultimately deploy buildings to assert and maintain his power. The architect Albert Speer was the official architect of the Nazi Party, whose monumental style, lack of ornament, and repetition of simple elements were all designed to make individuals feel small and pave the way for a single symbol to dominate. This is an architecture designed to control others. Even in the sketchbooks that Hitler kept during the 20s had drawings of buildings interspersed with drawings of weapons and battleships. For him, architecture was as much a weapon as any military machinery. This shows just how fluidly he associated buildings as instruments of violence, control, and warfare. Since World War II, the world community has come together to recognize the importance of targeting cultural symbols for destruction during war and to punish those that engage in the practice. This is the job of the Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of an armed conflict. It states parties to an armed conflict are not allowed to direct hostilities against cultural property and must avoid incidental damage to such property. Using cultural property for military purposes is prohibited. The blue shield emblem with red outline marks sites of enhanced protection. But these kinds of edicts have been consistently violated by Russian troops, and architecture has been treated as an economic, cultural, and logistical target as well as a weapon. Ukrainian museums in particular have been targets during this invasion, and some have been lost forever. The Museum of Ukrainian Folk Art was burned down by Russian troops in February of 2022. Ukrainians have rushed to save their cultural heritage, protecting sculptures and buildings. Images of piled up sandbags gathered around a statue in Odessa provides a particularly powerful image. But there are countless of other examples as well. The Latin Cathedral in Lviv is now armored with reinforced steel plates to protect its stained glass windows. Laura Ballman made associations to the barbarism of previous eras and said that not since Nazi Germany has a powerful European nation so blatantly targeted a people's cultural objects for destruction. Ihor Kozan, director of the National Museum of Lviv, reminded us, "This is a place of historical memory. The museums hold the history of the nation. They give us an understanding of who we were, who we are, and who we will be. Russia wants to destroy that." But the architecture community of the world and in the Ukraine is also acting during this war to help communities during the conflict with plans for dealing with its aftermath. From the outside, many top architectural practice around the world pulled out of projects in Russia, including Herzog and de Meuron, Snøhetta, Zaha Hadid, UN Studio, MVRDV, and OMA. These were actions that were intended to isolate Russia economically and politically. Architecture schools around the world are allowing transfer students from Ukraine. There are also some high-profile architects with initiatives to either provide aid during the crisis or visions for potential futures. The Pritzker Prize-winning architect Shigeru Ban designed a low-cost and quickly deployable paper partition system a number of years ago that is helping to humanize refugee centers across the Ukraine and Europe. They are cheap and disposable and erected in 5 minutes with 3 people. There are also efforts by architects like Norman Foster, who met with the mayor of Kharkiv to imagine how the city might rebuild, where housing, hospitals, schools, and heritage buildings, including an opera house, concert hall, and government offices, have reportedly been hit by shells. Foster claimed to assemble the best minds with the best planning, architectural, design, and engineering skills in the world to bear on the rebirth of the city of Kharkiv. But efforts like this from the outside can sometimes seem opportunistic and tone-deaf. Foster in particular has been criticized by the local architecture community. And of course, from the inside, there are countless untold acts of selfless support by architects in the Ukraine. Weeks into the crisis, architect Slava Balbek started thinking about the need for new housing for people who had to flee their homes. Already, an estimated 6.5 million people have been internally displaced within the Ukraine. Balbek developed a quickly deployable housing solution and modularly built town. The late architect and visionary Lebbeus Woods, when he was talking about Sarajevo, also recognized the difficulties in rebuilding. And he observed that there are basically 2 paradigms: build things back the way they were, or building afresh with some utopian vision of rebirth. He found that neither of these were completely appropriate, and instead the scars and the layers of tragedy usually remain, and the difficulty is in how these are able to coexist in a way that doesn't erase the complexity of history while still looking forward toward an optimistic future. You know, I've never made a video like this that tries to shed light on such a heavy topic and such a topical issue. I guess I tend to feel like I'm not necessarily the best person to tell this story. But Ashley Bingham, who talked about some of these issues in a lecture that she gave to my students at UIC, during her talk, she underscored the importance of everyone doing what they can to communicate issues around such an important topic. I'll link to the resources in the description that will likely be more in-depth than what I've been able to provide in this video, and I'll also link to places where you can go where you can help. This video is also uploaded to the streaming platform Nebula, without ads and with additional content on my thoughts about the process of rebuilding the World Trade Center. Issues around rebuilding post 9/11 is a good way to shed light on the way that maybe people are thinking about rebuilding in the Ukrainian crisis. Nebula has a lot of folks that you watch there on YouTube, like Not Just Bikes and Half as Interesting, and the viewing experience is really second to none. There's also a video about this war talked about in this video that in the way that it affects the International Space Station, and that one is done by Real Engineering. We at Nebula have been working with CuriosityStream, who have invested in us as part of their mission to bolster educational content on the web. If you use the link in the description, you'll receive Nebula for free and get 26% off your subscription to CuriosityStream. And I'll pledge for that for every person who signs up at curiositystream.com/Stewart Hicks, I'll donate $5 to Community Organized Relief Effort, or CORE, which is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to immediate crisis response. CuriosityStream is a streaming service that an almost endless supply of documentaries. If you're interested in learning more about the subject of this video, you might want to check out Capitulation, which is all about the rise of the Soviet Union coming out of World War II, Or if you want to dive deeper into understanding the tactics and effects of things like urban destruction during wartime, the one bombing war from Guernica to Hiroshima might help shed some light on the subject. So if you sign up using and with the link curiositystream.com/Stewart Hicks, you'll be able to get 26% off a full subscription to CuriosityStream. You'll get Nebula for free, and I'll be donating $5 to the community organized relief effort. It's really a great way to support a cause that you care about.